When the A-26 Invader first appeared over Europe in the summer and autumn of 1944, many Luftwaffe pilots dismissed it immediately. From a distance, it looked too small, too narrow, too clean. Nothing like the bulky, lumbering twin-engine bombers they were used to fighting. Compared to the B-25 Mitchell or the aging A-20 Havoc, the new machine flying with the 9th Air Force seemed almost toy-like. A compact airframe with a pointed nose, thin wings, and engines that hardly seemed large enough to pull a bomb load across the Rhine. German intelligence briefings described it in bland, almost condescending terms. Ein kleiner amerikanischer Zwei-Motor-Bomber, a small American twin-engine bomber, ähnlich wie eine leichte Version der BR-26. Some pilots even called it der Zwerg, the dwarf. To them, it was just another Allied aircraft to be knocked down like so many others in the grinding air battles over France, Belgium, and Western Germany. But those early judgments were made from afar, from the comfortable assumption that anything that small must also be slow, vulnerable, and limited. Luftwaffe veterans flying the Bf-109G and FW-190A believed they would catch it easily. They had intercepted hundreds of Allied tactical bombers before, A-20s, B-25s, and B-26s that required coordinated attacks, altitude advantage, and careful timing. The A-26, on paper, appeared even less threatening. It carried fewer crew. It carried less armor. It carried a smaller silhouette. Surely, they assumed, it also carried less speed. At that point in the war, German fighter doctrine relied heavily on performance advantages at certain altitudes. The Bf-109G6, the most common variant in late 1944, struggled above 20,000 feet, but was still formidable at low and medium altitudes. German aces believed that any Allied bomber flying below 10,000 feet was simply presenting itself as prey. And the first time many of them saw the A-26 was exactly in that zone. Sweeping low over treetops, hurtling between hedgerows, and racing toward bridges and vehicle columns during the rapid Allied advance across France. It looked reckless. It looked like an easy kill, something that fast and low couldn't possibly withstand an interception. At least, that was the assumption. Yet on the ground, the Allies were preparing something very different. The 9th Bombardment Division had begun replacing its A-20s and B-26s with the A-26, specifically because speed, not bulk, was what the late war demanded. The breakout from Normandy had transformed the European battlefield into a fluid, fast-moving front. Germany's armies were retreating toward the Siegfried Line, and every road, bridge, and convoy they used had to be struck immediately, not hours later. Tactical Air Command needed an aircraft that could form up quickly, strike quickly, and escape quickly. The A-26 had been built for exactly that purpose. Designed by Ed Heinemann and powered by two Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines, the Invader was the fastest twin-engine attack aircraft of the entire war, though almost no one on the German side realized it at first. Allied crews laughed when they heard how German pilots mocked the Invader. They knew what the Luftwaffe did not, that the small size and sleek lines were signs not of weakness, but of speed. Raw, overwhelming, fighter-like speed. When the Invader first flew over German positions near the Mosel River, many German troops thought it was a new Allied fighter bomber. When Bf-109 units scrambled to intercept it, radio calls repeatedly described it incorrectly. Eine neue Version der P-38? Ein kleiner Jagdbomber? The idea that it was a bomber, yet moved like a fighter, simply made no sense. But in headquarters across Germany, the dismissive attitude persisted. Reports cataloged the A-26 as a leichte Bomber, something on par with earlier American aircraft that Germany had already learned to counter. No one in Luftflotte Reich or Luftflotte West believed this new machine posed any new threat. They assumed it was just another Allied bomber arriving too late to matter. And so, as autumn turned to winter in 1944 and the front lines shifted toward the Ardennes, Luftwaffe pilots continued to joke about the small American aircraft that zipped along the treetops. They would soon discover their mistake, because the A-26 Invader was not simply small. It was not simply fast. It was fast enough to outrun them, fast enough to render their interception plans useless, fast enough to prove that the smallest bomber America had sent to Europe was about to become the most difficult to catch, and the Luftwaffe's mockery was about to turn into disbelief.
By the time the first Luftwaffe squadrons actually tried to intercept the A-26 Invader, The German pilots realized almost immediately that their assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. The sleek little bomber that intelligence officers had dismissed as nothing special was moving far faster than any twin-engine strike aircraft had a right to. In fact, the Invader was moving fast enough to break the fundamental rhythm of German interception doctrine. At low altitude, where most A-26 missions were flown, the Invader could reach 355 miles per hour, a figure that seemed impossible for a bomber of any kind. The Bf-109G6, the Luftwaffe's workhorse interceptor, managed around 330 to 350 miles per hour at similar altitudes, depending on fuel grade, engine condition, and under-wing equipment. The FW-190A8, burdened by armor and weapons, often performed worse. And the Jum-88 night fighters, those heavy twin-engine machines that were supposed to pounce on Allied light bombers, barely reached 310 miles per hour at low level. What German pilots encountered, then, was not a bomber by their traditional definition, but something entirely new, an aircraft that blurred categories. The first German pilot to report the A-26's true speed was not believed. His claim that the kleine amerikanische Bomber läuft uns davon, the small American bomber is running away from us, was seen as exaggeration or pilot error. But within weeks, similar complaints appeared in Luftwaffe debriefings across the Western Front. The Invader's secret was simple. It was built like a fighter that carried bombs. Its wings were thin, optimized for high-speed flight at low altitude. Its fuselage was narrow and aerodynamically clean. Its twin Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines, the same power plants that drove the P-47 Thunderbolt and F-4U Corsair, gave it acceleration that shocked even Allied pilots transitioning to the type. When the Invader's throttles were pushed forward, especially in a shallow dive, it surged ahead with fighter-like urgency. What this meant in practice was devastating for German interception attempts. A typical Luftwaffe scramble against A-20s or B-26s relied on a climb to an advantageous position, then a diving attack to close the distance. But the Invader refused to be caught. If the Germans were above it, it simply dove and pulled away. If they were behind it, it slowly but relentlessly increased the gap. If they approached from the side, the A-26 pilot shoved the throttles forward and slipped out of the engagement envelope entirely. German squadron leaders began complaining openly. One report from a Bf-109G unit near Cologne stated, "Der neue amerikanische Bomber benimmt sich wie ein Jagdflugzeug." The new American bomber behaves like a fighter aircraft. Another pilot wrote after a failed interception near Saarbrücken, "Wir haben nur einen Moment zum Feuern, dann ist weg. We have only a moment to fire, then it is gone." This was not the way the Luftwaffe was used to fighting Allied bombers. B-17s and B-24s were large, slow by comparison, steady targets that required coordinated attack runs. Even the B-25s and A-20s demanded only moderate effort to intercept. The A-26, however, flipped the script entirely. Its speed forced German pilots to take hasty, poorly aligned shots. It denied them the time needed to stabilize gun sights. It punished their slightest hesitation by opening the gap and vanishing into clouds or terrain. Even more frustrating for German pilots was the Invader's ability to maintain high speed while carrying weapons. Many aircraft flew fast when clean, but slowed drastically with bombs or external ordnance. The A-26, with internal bomb bays and streamlined design, barely suffered at all. A formation of Invaders heading for a bridge over the Rhine could maintain nearly the same cruising speed as one returning empty. Because of this, the Luftwaffe struggled to intercept Invaders not only in combat, but even during transit. Radar operators tracking low-level intruders complained that by the time fighters were scrambled and vectored into position, the American aircraft were already completing their strike and leaving the area. The speed of the A-26 compressed the window of vulnerability down to minutes, far too short for the Luftwaffe's increasingly fuel-starved, maintenance-starved units. And then came the shock that truly broke the Luftwaffe's confidence. Head-to-head performance tests by Allied pilots suggested that an A-26 in good condition at low altitude could stay with a Bf-109 for long enough to deny an easy kill. In level flight under 5,000 feet, their speed was comparable. In a shallow dive, the A-26 often pulled ahead. This was the moment German pilots realized the truth. The bomber they had mocked was not a joke. It was not prey. It was, in many respects, a predator, one that could outrun their interceptors, disrupt their timing, and survive combat encounters that should have destroyed it. The A-26 Invader had rewritten the rules of tactical air warfare, and the Luftwaffe, battered by fuel shortages, attrition, and overtasked units, was suddenly facing a bomber too fast for their fighters to reliably touch. And the worst part was still to come, because the Invader wasn't just fast. It was armed like a monster.
The first real encounters between the Luftwaffe and the A-26 Invader were not dramatic set-piece battles. They were quick, chaotic, low-level engagements, moments when German pilots diving through cloud or racing over treetops suddenly realized that the small American bomber they had mocked was not only fast, but dangerously well-armed. The shock of those first clashes spread through German units faster than any intelligence report ever could. One of the earliest encounters occurred in December 1944 as A-26s from the 386th Bomb Group were attacking German supply convoys moving toward the Ardennes. A pair of Bf-109Gs from JG-53 spotted the formation and moved in confidently. The leader expected an easy intercept, approach from the rear quarter, fire once, and break away before the tail gunners responded. But as he closed to firing range, something unexpected happened. The invaders didn't slow. They didn't tighten formation to defend. They accelerated. The entire group dropped to tree level and surged forward in a shallow dive that instantly erased the altitude advantage of the German fighters. The Bf-109 leader later reported, "Wir haben sie nicht eingeholt. Sie gingen einfach weg. We did not catch them. They simply went away." Another incident near Bremen, late 1944, revealed the second unpleasant surprise: the invaders' forward firepower. A lone A-26B, equipped with the 8-gun nose package, 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns all firing forward, was returning from a strike on a rail junction when it was bounced by a pair of FW-190s. The German pilots rolled into attack position expecting to get on the invader's tail. But the A-26 pilot snapped the plane into a shallow turn and unleashed a torrent of machine gun fire directly ahead. The concentrated stream of .50 caliber rounds forced the lead FW-190 to brake hard, losing its energy advantage. The second attacker attempted a high-speed pass from above, but the Invader dove away, its twin R-2800 engines roaring as it picked up speed shockingly fast. Within seconds, the bomber had leveled out at low altitude and was pulling away. The German fighters abandoned the chase. These encounters weren't isolated anomalies, they became a pattern. Luftwaffe pilots increasingly complained that the A-26 could not be approached safely from the front or the sides due to its murderous forward-facing firepower, and could not be approached from the rear because it simply outran pursuit. The aircraft's gun nose variants could carry 6, 8, or even 14 .50 caliber machine guns in total when counting wing installations. This gave the Invader more forward firepower than many American fighters. Then came the Battle of the Bulge, where the freezing fog of December 1944 forced tactical air power to operate at extremely low altitudes. Visibility was terrible. Engagement ranges were often under 1,000 meters. And in this knife-fight environment, the Invader's speed and firepower made it a nightmare opponent. On 23 December, A-26s supporting the 30th Infantry Division near Malmedy encountered Bf-109s attempting to intercept them through gaps in the clouds. But the German fighters struggled to match the bomber's speed while simultaneously avoiding flak and ground fire. Several Bf-109 pilots later complained
that the Invader's low-level attack profile made it nearly impossible to line up a proper firing pass. Ground reports confirmed what the Luftwaffe already feared. A-26 losses to fighters were far lower than expected, and when losses did occur, they tended to result from flak, not interception. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe night fighter units, Nachtjagd, encountered the Invader as well. These units, equipped with Ju-88G and Bf-110G night fighters, attempted to intercept Allied intruders conducting low-level night raids on airfields and rail lines. But the Invader's speed at low altitude again proved crippling. A Ju-88G radar operator wrote in February 1945, "Dieses neue amerikanische Flugzeug ist zu schnell für eine sichere Verfolgung." This new American aircraft is too fast for a safe pursuit. As the Invader began appearing over the Ruhr and the Rhineland, its reputation among German pilots transformed. What had once been mocked as a tiny twin-engine bomber was now understood as a machine built for one purpose: high-speed destruction. It raced in, delivered its bombs or rockets, strafed anything unlucky enough to be beneath it, and vanished before fighters could meaningfully react. The psychological effect inside the Luftwaffe was profound. Pilots who once assumed superiority at low altitude now faced an aircraft that negated that advantage entirely. Ground controllers complained that A-26 formations crossed their radar screens too quickly for meaningful vectoring. Fighter groups reported entire missions where they never even got close enough to fire. The Invader was not immortal. It could be shot down. But every German pilot who fought it learned the same bitter lesson. It was not the easy kill they had expected. It was something far more dangerous. And as the Allies prepared to cross the Rhine, the Luftwaffe would discover that the A-26 was not merely fast, it was built to tear the heart out of German logistics with terrifying efficiency.
By early 1945, as the Allies pushed toward the Rhine, the Luftwaffe began to understand the A-26 Invader's true nature. It was not a scaled-down bomber sent to replace the A-20 or B-26. It was something fundamentally different, a new breed of fast, tactical attacker designed for a type of warfare Germany could no longer counter. Every structural line of the Invader, from its polished aerodynamic fuselage to its thin laminar flow wings, reflected a philosophy that had matured across years of Allied combat experience. Speed is survival, and speed is lethality. The war in Europe had evolved into a vast, fast-moving battle of fuel depots, road junctions, rail centers, bridges, and armored columns. Victory depended on how quickly each side could strike the other's mobility. The Invader had been built for precisely this environment. Unlike strategic bombers, the A-26 was engineered around tactical destruction. Hit enemy movement, sever supply arteries, cripple reinforcements before they reached the front. And its pilots discovered that speed was more than an advantage, it was a weapon in itself. A typical Invader attack run began at treetop level, throttles open, the engines screaming at 50 inches of manifold pressure. The aircraft approached the target at 300 to 340 miles per hour, faster than many German fighters cruised. Bridges collapsed before flat crews could swing their guns. Ammunition trains erupted in flame moments after detection. Vehicle columns scattered, though often too late as the Invader's nose guns tore through them at point-blank range. The German ground controllers who monitored Allied aircraft on their Freya and Wurzburg radars complained bitterly. The Invader was on screen for only minutes, sometimes seconds, before it vanished again, either masked by terrain or already exiting the target zone. In regions like the Moselle Valley, where narrow ridges and riverbeds broke line of sight, the A-26 behaved like a phantom. German staff officers realized that even their fastest scramble procedures could not match the bomber's attack tempo. By the time fighters formed up, the Invaders were long gone. But this tactical advantage came from more than just raw engine power. The A-26's internal bay allowed it to maintain its aerodynamic profile while carrying bombs, unlike many German aircraft that suffered severe performance drops with external ordnance racks. Even loaded with 6 500-pound bombs, or in some missions, clusters of incendiaries, fragmentation bombs, or parafrags,
The Invader held speeds that left German interceptors struggling to close distance. In addition, the A-26 could be fitted with rocket rails carrying HVARs, giving it even greater punch against armored vehicles and hardened structures. Allied pilots quickly came to appreciate the Invader's extraordinary survivability. Not because it carried heavy armor, it didn't, but because speed let crews choose when and where to fight. A typical Invader tactic when confronted by fighters, recorded repeatedly in 9th Air Force mission logs, was brutally simple: dive and go home at max power. Most German fighters could not match the Invader's acceleration in a low-level dive, and those that tried risked overstressing their airframes. In many cases, the Invader didn't need to outrun the fighters entirely. It only had to sprint to a patch of heavy flak from friendly ground forces or cross into coverage from P-47 or P-51 escorts further west. German field commanders experienced another unwelcome revelation in 1945. The Invader could strike repeatedly with minimal turnaround time. Thanks to its robust engines and simple servicing requirements, A-26 squadrons kept a high sortie rate even in harsh winter conditions. When the Allies reached the Siegfried Line, Invaders launched close support missions from advanced landing grounds only minutes from the front. Some units flew 3, even 4 sorties per day, an operational tempo the Luftwaffe could hope to match. The Invader's gun nose variants were especially feared. Equipped with 8 to 14 forward-firing .50 caliber grounding machine guns, these aircraft were essentially flying battering rams. A single firing pass could shred half-tracks, trucks, and lightly armored vehicles. German troops caught on the roads during the retreat from the Saar region wrote bitterly about the Schwarze Destroyer, or Black Destroyers, that came out of nowhere, straved with overwhelming firepower, and vanished before anti-air crews could respond. And the Invader's precision only amplified the pressure. When tasked with attacking bridges over the Ruhr, Rhine, and Main rivers, A-26 crews consistently delivered hits at medium and even low altitude, often succeeding in single-pass strikes that larger bombers could not match. These successes forced German engineers into a perpetual cycle of rebuilding and defending infrastructure that was instantly destroyed again. By February and March 1945, German intelligence analysts finally began describing the Invader accurately. A report from Luftwaffe West admitted that 26 is kein gewöhnlicher Bomber, ist ein schneller Angriffsjäger. The A-26 is not an ordinary bomber, it is a fast attack fighter. Another report characterized it as äußerst schwer abzufangen, extremely difficult to intercept. That late acknowledgement came too late. The Invader had already carved a reputation as one of the most effective tactical strike platforms of the war, throttling German mobility while giving Allied ground forces a constant edge. It did not matter that the Luftwaffe had once mocked it. By 1945, German commanders no longer laughed. They were too busy trying to survive a bomber they could not catch. And soon they would face the final humiliating truth that this tiny bomber was more than fast. It was rewriting the tactical battlefield itself.
By the spring of 1945, the Luftwaffe no longer joked about the A-26 Invader. The mockery that had greeted the aircraft in late 1944, calling it a Zwerg, a toy-sized bomber, and unimpressive twin-engine nuisance, had evaporated entirely. In its place grew a grudging respect mixed with frustration and exhaustion. The aircraft they once dismissed had become one of the greatest threats to German mobility, infrastructure, and retreating formations. The myth that the A-26 was weak or easy prey had not merely been disproven, it had been obliterated. The transformation of opinion inside the Luftwaffe was recorded in surviving documents. Reports that once minimized the Invader now contained lines such as äußerst schnell, äußerst schwer abzufangen, and ähnlich einem Jagdbomber. Extremely fast, extremely difficult to intercept, and similar to a fighter bomber. This was not admiration, it was resignation. Germany, battered by fuel shortages, inexperienced pilots, and collapsing supply lines, no longer possessed the means to reliably counter an aircraft that entered and exited battles faster than they could react. The strategic effects were unmistakable. As Allied armies crossed the Rhine and surged toward the Ruhr pocket, the Invader became a constant presence, a black, angular shape
streaking low across the landscape, scattering vehicle columns, torching ammunition dumps, and shredding rear area units. German soldiers on the ground described the aircraft with dread. Unlike the deep, rolling sound of four-engine bombers, the A-26 arrived with a sharper, predatory roar, followed immediately by the ripping thrum of heavy machine gun fire or the thunder of low-level bomb drops. It struck fast enough that trucks had no time to disperse and artillery crews no time to hide their guns. The Invader wasn't just a fast bomber. It was a tactical scalpel, cutting into the German war machine precisely where its arteries were thinnest. Allied commanders praised its reliability and its uncanny ability to deliver destruction on short notice. Field reports frequently described A-26 missions that turned the tide of local engagements. A bridge outside Remagen, destroyed minutes before German armor crossed. A supply column near Wessel annihilated in a single pass. A rail junction near Nuremberg rendered useless just as a panzer regiment attempted refueling. German pilots who attempted to intercept these missions found themselves increasingly outmatched not only by the aircraft but by the battlefield itself. Fuel shortages left many Bf-109 and Fw-190 sorties dangerously short. Engine reliability, once the Luftwaffe's pride, had deteriorated. Meanwhile, the A-26's R-2800 engines remained robust even after long hours of combat flying from forward airstrips in Belgium, France, and Western Germany. German staff officers desperately tried to restructure their logistics to avoid the brutal tempo of Invader strikes, shifting supplies to night movements or forested roads. But the Allied dominance of the air, combined with the Invaders' ability to roam widely and strike with little warning, made such efforts increasingly futile. By war's end, the Luftwaffe understood that they had misjudged the Invader, not simply because they underestimated its size, but because the A-26 represented a new generation of attack aircraft, an aircraft defined not by bomb load or armor, but by speed, precision, and adaptability. It was exactly the tool the Allies needed in the final mobile phase of the war. The final humiliation for German pilots came after the surrender, when they learned that the tiny bomber they had mocked would go on to serve for decades, fighting in Korea, Vietnam, and countless Cold War conflicts, while most Luftwaffe wartime designs vanished into history. The Invader's longevity was proof of a simple truth. It had not merely excelled in World War II, it had been ahead of its time. For the German pilots who once thought it a joke, the realization was bitter. They had underestimated an aircraft that outflew their fighters, outgunned their expectations, and outlasted their entire air force. In the final months of 1945, the Luftwaffe looked up at the clear spring sky and knew the truth. The A-26 Invader was never a tiny bomber. It was the fastest, deadliest strike aircraft of the war's end, and they had learned that lesson far too late.